Okay, and we are live. Everybody, welcome and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today physically here in this great venue in Łódź and digitally, remotely online. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, we're started a bit late. We're going to try to make up the time as we go along. My name is Andrei Constantin. I'm going to be the moderator of this amazing panel on the future of digitalization, the Digital Services Act package. I'm the program officer at the European Liberal Forum, which is the official think tank and political foundation of the European Liberal Party, the ALDE party. And together with 47 member organizations, we work throughout Europe to bring new ideas to the political debate and to make all the voices heard. And first of all, I would like to thank Fundacja Liberté for hosting us, for hosting this ELF Hub today on this very, very important topic for all of us, the Digital Services Act package. Now, before we start, I just wanted to ask all the members here in the audience, if by raise of hand, if you know what the Digital Services Act package is. All right, and then everybody else, you came here because you wanted to learn more about the Digital Services Act package? I see some nodding heads in the audience. Okay, very good. So we have a bit for everybody today, and we're going to try to make everybody happy. We were supposed to welcome MEP Dita Charanzová live today, remotely. Unfortunately, she can't connect, so she sent us a recorded message of her introduction. Now, before we go to that, just a couple of words about Dita so you know where she's coming from. She's the Vice President of the European Parliament. She's coming from Czech Republic, and she's also Vice President of the ALDE party. She's part of the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament, and she is their coordinator in the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee. And she's the shadow rapporteur for the Digital Services Act. So she cannot be closer to the action when it comes to this legislative package. So without further ado, I'll ask my colleagues from the technical team to play Dita's message.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for inviting me to introduce this panel and to set the stage for your discussion. The background is clear. Today, we have an internet that is a fundamental part of daily lives of European citizens. For many, a day without the internet is either a curse or an escape. The first thing we do in the morning is to look at our phone, and it is also the last thing we do at the night. The internet is today a mirror of the offline world. If you think of any good or service communication tool, cultural object, or fashion trend, it is hard to find something that doesn't link into a digital platform of some type. The internet is now directly or indirectly part of all progress and innovation. The internet has also influenced politics, the way we consume and share information, and how we voice our opinions. It has helped to bridge the gap between politicians and our electorates by making politics more transparent and inclusive and opening more channels of communication. The internet, however, also mirrors the bet in our society. We have witnessed how disinformation has affected elections, for instance. The innovations of the internet, which brought us so many positive things, also brought digitalized crime, widespread voices of disinformation, fake news, and the consolidation of amounts of power in the hands of few. For many, it is the dark side of the internet that dominates attitudes on what the Digital Services Act and other legislation should focus on. We are told that it's time to clean up and sanitize the internet, and in many ways, I agree with this statement. However, I would ask us to step back for a second and think. How old is the modern internet? Roughly 20 years. The first phone was created only 14 years ago. Now think, how long have crime or frauds, misleading ads and false promises, propaganda or hate and disinformation existed? Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing new under the sun. As we draft laws that will affect the daily lives of millions of individuals and businesses, we cannot draft based on the last scandals or the last tragic story that day. We must think about the results of our actions in the long term and if it will really solve the problems we face, without, of course, creating new ones in their place. The internet is a tool used by good and bad actors, but is not the source of our social issues. For me, the answer to bad actors is not to censor the internet and e-commerce, but to make it easier for businesses and consumers to access and sell content in a legal way. We have to remember that what killed the illegal downloading of MP3 file was not harsh punishment, but the rise of legal streaming options. We are seeing the same with video streaming now. Innovation, new business models are the solutions, not a cat and mouse game with bad actors. This is the vision that I hope we can have instead we look at the Digital Services Act. Which brings me to the current state of play of our work in the European Parliament on the Digital Services Act. With more than 2,297 amendments tabled, we are far from a clear outcome on all points yet. However, from my reading of different positions, I have the sense that many companies and groups think of this as a way to get at their rivals or to attack one sector in order to distract from another. And I disagree with this. The original European Commission proposal idea could be boiled down to: if someone sees something illegal online and tells a provider, it must follow a set of rules, take down the content, and be transparent about how they did it. If the provider doesn't do this, the government can punish them. If we put aside the question of what is illegal and where, it seems like a very straightforward system. The most valuable part of that is the single harmonized set of rules. This would mean removing 27 different national ones, less red tape, and stable legal framework for our businesses to innovate and to go cross-border in Europe. This is why the DSA can be a good tool for progress and help our businesses and citizens online. But in order to achieve this, the DSA, like the e-commerce directive, must remain a horizontal base law. This is the base of the house, not the house itself. It must be solid and balanced for everyone. The foundation allows us to build the house of a free market with lex specialis where needed. Vertical laws that are exact and tailored to each sector, administered and monitored by the right regulators, and parts of the communication and which don't cause collateral damage to unrelated sectors. This is why I'm not a fan of the attempts to go after one sector or other within the DSA. I believe we are harming the foundation of the overall internet regulation. New liability exception rules, for example, that make it almost impossible to meet the requirements are just as bad or worse, and just deleting the liability protection altogether. I would not call for an extreme departure, as some governments or the rapporteur have. Ladies and gentlemen, it might be boring, but boring is a good for businesses and good for users' freedoms. The problem is, of course, that with this vision, we cannot put the question of what is illegal aside. What is legal or illegal is very different in each member state. This is why I'm currently fighting to increase the safeguards for users and businesses. That if a government or flagger believes a content is illegal and it is not, that you can defend yourself or your users. I don't believe we can give absolute powers to governments to decide what we can and cannot see on the internet. This is the road to state censorship. Preventing this is a focus of my amendments. At the same time, I think it is foolhardy to think that a one-size-fits-all takedown system will work for the infinitive different types of sites on the internet. Sometimes the cause is worse than the disease. This is why I have asked for a waiver to be introduced to allow sites like Wikipedia or others, which only serves the public interest, to have the burden of these new rules lifted from them. Not all websites are the same, so we should not treat them the same beyond some basic principles. I have sought to make sure we only adopt rules that or when there is a clear benefit for consumers and not just a burden for its own sake. And the same goes for transparency. While I'm a big fan of transparency, transparency is only useful if it serves a purpose. Creating a report that no one ever reads is just a burden without a benefit. Similarly, making a website invest in expensive content management systems when the risk for those services is minimal will have only a negative effect on these providers. We should not accidentally cause the death of startups and scale-ups in Europe through more burdens, which would mean less new innovation within Europe and more of our tech experts moving to other countries to start their businesses. If the goal is to build up our domestic companies against the tech giants, adding these new burdens would be an error, as it will only consolidate the power of those same giants. Ladies and gentlemen, we need always protect liberties, even if there is a risk that comes with that. Overregulation will not make you safer online. Common sense is what helps us offline as well online. The Digital Services Act must not be turned into Frankenstein's monster, but I'm afraid it might. I pledge, though, to do my best to keep the internet as free as it is today and to work to get the DSA right. If we get it wrong, we will only open the door do more walled gardens, and a new Chinese-style internet. If we get it right, we will help to grow the internet in Europe. Thank you again for inviting me, and I wish you a good discussion.
And we're back. A big thank you to MEP Dita Charanzová for taking the time to record that opening speech for our session. I would have liked to do some follow-up questions on some of the more important and more topical issues that she raised in her speech, but I'm sure that we'll have a chance to discuss with the speakers and with you later today. Now, we're going to go to our panelists here on the stage. We've got an amazing panel from you, ranging from politics, industry, and journalism. Just for you to know how we're going to do it, each speaker will get a couple of minutes to do an opening intervention to say their position on the package, and then we're going to open the floor to questions from the public, from you, and we're just going to have a nice discussion on the topic of the session, with an idea of finishing at 3:15, so you can grab a coffee before the next session starts. So without further ado, let's spice it up. So I'm going to start from my other end, and then we're going to go like that. We have Marcin Olender, Government Affairs and Public Policy Manager for Central and Eastern Europe at Google and YouTube. A lawyer by training, alumnus of the National School of Public Administration of Poland. Before joining Google, he was a civil servant in several public institutions, most recently the Ministry of Digital Affairs of Poland. So, Marcin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Andrei. Good afternoon, all. Thank you for the invitation. And before the panel, we agreed with the other panelists to speak Polish. So if you forgive us for this, but as we said, we are in Poland, so let's speak Polish. Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for inviting us and for so many of you coming here. We were afraid that such a tight topic will not be interesting for many of you after such a brilliant presentation as the previous one. So we are very happy to see you here and to listen to us. Andrei asked who knows the package, but there were not so many hands up. So in order to present the Polish context, I would like to refer to our National Act on Electronic Services, which is the primary act regulating the operation of entities providing internet services. The act that Dita Charanzová was talking about so nicely will replace the referenced act in our country as the direct regulation effective in all member states. It's going to be the primary act to determine the rules, responsibilities of internet entities, who can post what, who is responsible for what, and what authorizations state entities have towards them. This is one of the most important topics. As for our approach, Ms. Charanzová was talking beautifully and said a lot of great things about it, and actually I cannot add anything as she summarized the status quo and the progress of works on the project. What the Commission proposed, in our opinion, is a sensible and reasonable solution. The basis that the Commission decided to maintain from the current e-commerce directive that is under implementation in Poland under the Act on Electronic Service Provision. It has been shifted to the new act, slightly extended, but in a positive way that definitely deserves appreciation. And generally speaking, as a draft project, as the vision, it seems cohesive, coherent, based on good principles, adequate assessment of the regulation effects. So some might be surprised that we like the project and that we consider the concept of uniform regulation is beneficial for entities providing internet services because it eliminates a barrier against development of uniform digital market, namely separate national regulations. During works on the draft, as Ms. Charanzová referred to works in the Parliament, where over 2,000 amendments were submitted, but simultaneously works in the Council are ongoing, and the states are trying to provide as much authorization as possible. This is the current trend that what is the greatest value for constructing the common market and uniform rules for everybody is challenged by some. And from the point of view of us as the company that provides services above all borders, is of pivotal importance. There are some minor issues where we are burdened, so to speak, because the regulation will mean a lot of costs, a lot of obligations. However, the original does not contain anything that we could contradict. As Ms. Charanzová mentioned, I refer to transparency. As a rule, they are reasonable and sensible if feasible. In the draft, perhaps some amendments could be implemented, but as a principle, there are no major problems. There is a risk that during works, the draft could be modified by the states in order to maintain these separate country regulations, or some groups, as Ms. Charanzová mentioned, could like to introduce some components such as ban on profiled advertising, for instance. So we support the concept and the original idea, but on the other hand, we are slightly concerned about which way it's going to follow during legislation works.
Thank you very much for that. You made some very, very good points, and we're going to come back to that in the second part when we're going to have the moderated discussion and the Q&A. So now I want to go to our next speaker, Ms. Sylwia Czubkowska, and I do apologize if I mispronounced that your name. She's an economic and technology journalist. She's the editor-in-chief of Spider's Web Plus, an online magazine about new technologies. Previously, she worked at Gazeta Wyborcza, Dziennik Gazeta Prawna, Daily Polska, The Times, and the weekly Press Kroj. I was almost there. Check me. 3 times nominated for the Grand Press Award in the Special Journalism category, and 4th time winner of the Journalist Award of the Polish Patent Office. So Sylwia, what's your opinion on the DSA package?
Dziękuję bardzo za głos i bardzo mi
Thank you very much. I would like to say that I'm so happy to see so many of you here during such a specialized panel. My role is to convince you that it's not really true what Ms. Charanzová said, that the more boring the better, because actually what we are talking about today and what we deal with is not boring at all. It can be treated as legal issues at first glance. At second glance, it's also legal because it's about working on specific regulations which are highly specialized. However, everything that is going on along DSA and DNA, Digital Market Act and Digital Service Act, is not boring at all. It's not boring because it applies to our life here and now, and the life that we would like to live in a comfortable and safe way. But also, it's not boring because the whole work surrounding the regulations is like a boozing barrel of highly interesting information. I think we should focus on a very important aspect of Ms. Charanzova's speech. 2,300 amendments within several months. This is such a big number of applications, which tells that by these two regulations, we touch upon highly difficult topic. Difficult, complicated, complex, and raising extreme emotions. How extreme the emotions are? We have to become aware that during these works, not only the applications of the member states are taken into account, but also the applications from the large and small technological sector, citizens, NGOs, and so on and so forth. The primary two powers that affect the works and the regulations are, on the one hand, large technological sector represented by Mr. Olender, the famous big techs. How strong their operations are, it is very well presented by the European Observatory latest report, which shows that no economy sector in Europe has so much lobbying expenditure as the tech sector. This is expenditure much higher than in the pharma sector, fuel sector, or even power sector as a whole. And it results from something. It results from working on the acts that are going to be like foundation, like basement of a large house where we are all supposed to live. So it's good to have lobbying because it demonstrates the interest of the large tech players. How big is the expenditure? So big that among the 10 largest companies that lobby are such big techs as IBM, Vodafone, only large companies, 10 biggest players. The other power, which is a major player, are the member states. So the political decisions originate from these member states. The two extreme positions clash, and consequently, it's not boring at all. Only interesting things are happening, so it's worth becoming interested in it, especially if we don't carry out a coordinated analysis of what is going on, if we don't pay attention to what is happening. We, as the citizens of individual member states, will be confused. It's easier to convince us that some local activities are more important and not contradict the works. Let me quote two legislation concepts that emerged in Poland, and clearly they apply to what the DSA and the DNA are supposed to deal with. We talk a lot about freedom of speech, so theoretically the Freedom of Speech Act could be the perfect example of where we are following. Unfortunately, due to the fact that they imposed the obligation to fight private censorship, they did not impose any obligations to protect us against the hatred speech. It was purely political and nothing substantive. The other act, which I would like to quote, is the pseudo-digital tax, namely a tax on digital advertisements, and it was simply meant to convince the citizens that we deal with the key issue. And the third power, which I have not mentioned, but is extremely important today and will gain even greater importance, but should alert us to reasonably accelerate the works on DMA and DSA, is what is happening in China nowadays. The last few weeks saw a a real hurricane of regulations related to media, entertainment, and digital sector. We could say it's like a move fast and break big tech's phenomenon. This is something that not only the Communist Party in China likes, but this is what many politicians and analysts like, because in the decisive and quick steps, they see the potential to regularize algorithms. The question is, do we really want such imposed solution in controversial issues and issues related to big techs? I think that big techs don't want it, technological companies don't want it, and the citizens of the European Union should not be interested in it either. This is the key reason why the works on DSA and DMA should be perceived not only as legislative works, but important challenges of the new social contract that we deliberate on so much.
Some very thought-provoking points and some points that will make the discussion quite interesting after we listen to our last but not least speaker, keeping the best for last. We have a member of the Polish Parliament, Arkadiusz Marchewka. Marchewka. I'm not gonna. No, I'm not gonna say that. So he's a member of the Polish Parliament, where he works on the Digitization, Innovation, New Technologies Committee and the Public Finance Committee. Prior to this, he was responsible for digitization, innovation, and youth policy in the shadow cabinet created by the Civic Platform Party. He holds a PhD in economics and conducts research activities as a lecturer at the Institute of Management at the University of Szczecin, okay. Sorry about that, sorry. Arkadiusz, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will also speak in Polish. Szanowni Państwo,
Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's true what you have said. These issues are not boring. They are very important in the 21st century. The data on what we are doing is the most valuable currency. The corporations can get a lot of information on us, information from profiling, and not only. And I think that the regulation, Digital Services Act, is really necessary to make sure that these issues will be provided with a framework that will allow to protect our privacy, transparency, and it will allow us to have this feeling of being the key object in this internet chaos that is becoming more and more complex. I am a young generation representative on the Polish Parliament's meeting. I remember when I was little and when my mom was shouting to me, switch off this internet because I want to make a telephone call. And that's true. So some of the regulations that function now were developed 20 years ago, and Facebook was not available then. Amazon started selling books at the time. And in fact, it was developing. It was in a completely different place. Now we've got over 8 billion people throughout the world. Over 5 billion are using internet, and over 4 billion are the users of different kinds of social platforms. So it shows how important internet is to humanity, also in the context of Europe. So it allows to propose some rules that will allow all users to play using the fair rules. I think it's worth adding to those of you who would like to extend your knowledge. The proposed regulation, DSA, for instance, are to ensure that every user has knowledge why specific advertisement was sent to him. What was the foundation for making this decision? Which algorithm was used? So the users will be able to modify such decisions. Transparency is an important issue. Our awareness is very important. And the worst solution is the solutions such as Chinese proposals. In China, they develop a separated internet where you can play specific games only at specific times of the day or on specific days. Not everybody can use them. Users are unable. Actually, businesses cannot send some advertisements to the specific target audience. So, why is it so important nowadays? I'm looking at the situation that took place 2 days ago. So Facebook presented a new gadget, sunglasses, rainbow stories. They are supplied with cameras. The glasses, you can use the sunglasses to send a movie to social media. Probably in a few years' time, there will be sunglasses that will present information to social media. What do we look at for most of the time? What is the width of our pupils when we are looking at something? So some experiments on a narrow group of users are already conducted. So we have to make sure that we have a control over it. We should have a know-how, the knowledge how such data is used. So I think that this kind of solutions, these types of regulations identify a good direction, but I am also a supporter who thinks that such regulations should be adopted at the European level. Just like when we are talking about the single digital market, to make sure that the users are using the platforms based on the same rules and regulations. It's not a good idea for me that member states introduce their own rules. So to me, it's very important. We should discuss it. It's needed, and it's not boring at all.
Thank you very much for that opening intervention. And that brings the first part of our panel to a close. Looking at the time, we have 16 minutes left. So we're going to go straight into the moderated discussion. I'm going to start off with a couple of quick follow-up questions for our speakers, and then I'm going to take any and all questions from the audience. So please write them down, keep them in mind, and we're going to go back to them in a second. I want to go back. Actually, we're gonna go back the same way, and I'm going to start with Marcin. Actually, in light of what your fellow speakers said as well, and in light of the fact that indeed the lobby tech group in Brussels is very big, exactly like Sylwia mentioned as well. And the fact that you seem to be happy with the legislative package, even though some amendments will be made, of course, by the European Parliament, by the member states. Do you think that the package does enough to differentiate between small and medium enterprises and big companies? And how do you feel about that? Do you think that the package should do more to differentiate between these two types of companies? Or do you think that it does too much? And if so, why?
Thanks for that question, Andrei. We have this saying, I will switch to Polish now.
We have a saying the fish, okay, the carb that is served as a Christmas dish is voting to accelerate the Christmas. So actually, the differentiation is already available. Well, it really applies these big companies. And under DSA, we can see several different categories of businesses. It's, again, us, and again, these large companies are covered. So this differentiation is quite strong. I don't think that it shouldn't be expanded. I think it's the right approach. Obligations should depend on the nature of the service on the one hand, and on the size of the company on the other, and on the impact it generates on the economy. So I'm for this. I support this approach. And I think that the size, this gradation is correct, is appropriate. But I think that maybe we should consider the thresholds and the scope of some obligations. For example, concentration at the European level. I don't know whether it's appropriate for some cases, because we have some companies that have strong position in some selected markets. When in the local scale, these companies can be very strong, especially it concerns small member states. I think we should still develop some detailed solutions, but the approach is okay. The scale of lobbying, I think it's a straightforward result of the activity of Brussels that is very strong about regulation of digital economy. Since starting with the directive on audiovisual media services, asking for copyrights, the sale of digital goods, and the GDPR regulation. So there are lots of digital regulation. And as Mrs. Charanzová was saying, many groups were trying to promote their interests, not only one sector. So there is very strong lobbying in Brussels, and we should become involved, because all stakeholders should have a say.
For our audience to know as well, the European Commission did have meetings with a lot of stakeholders before they came out with these legislative packages on the 15th of December 2020. All the documents are available online on the European Commission website if you are interested in seeing how the discussions with the stakeholders went. Thank you very much for that, Marcin. Moving on, Sylwia, if you want to jump on anything Marcin said, I'm going to give you the floor right now, but I also do want to ask a question as a follow-up to your opening intervention. Now, you mentioned some pieces of Polish legislation, and this connects very well to one of the big questions when it comes in particular to the DSA. Who decides what's legal, what's illegal? Do we need to have more safeguards when it comes to giving this power to an entity, be it a third-party entity, be it a national entity, be it a European-level entity? Who knows? Maybe we're going to create a new one. What do you think of that?
To jest bardzo ważne I bardzo dobre pytanie, bo
A very important and good question. A lot we are discussing today, so the questions, the issues of regulations for technologies, well, it's about making sure who makes the decision on some specific issues and matters. Currently, we've got the following situation. There has been a change in the gradation. not the importance of the law, but the decision made pursuant to the law. I will give you an example of what I mean. I think that most of you, maybe you haven't heard about DSA or DMA, maybe you've heard about the problem of being banned on Facebook. Some accounts are locked, some contents are banned. So it's done based on the regulations by Facebook. In the typical legal order, the regulations of companies are below the constitutions, and now this is more or less the same because there's no appeal process from such decisions. So the Facebook decided to ban the content. So where can we file such a case? In Poland, maybe in California. Actually, in Poland, we've got the first litigations. But it's a very difficult process for now. So DSA is to provide answers to such questions. Who is the regulator? And who is the recipient of specific questions and problems we are facing today, and we will face them in future? So it's related with another important issue. I do hope that the package will regulate this problem and will be like a safeguard for this problem. So we will want to make politics separated. We have seen it in many legislative processes. We are introducing lots of amendments to resolve a current problem. But when we are talking about technological problems, such phenomena are accelerating. That is why I have managed the Act on the Freedom of Speech, like Trump, because in Poland, this act was to support Donald Trump. Because at the time, this is how the political atmosphere was at the time. So it's a really bad situation when we are using the law to resolve problems in the ad hoc basis. We should have access to guidelines. That's why we need general regulation of the European Union that will make sure that the national legislation will be used smoothly. To make sure that it's independent of the politicians, because nowadays we've got Law and Justice Party. Tomorrow maybe it will be the Civic Platform or the Hołownia movement. So it's a natural process that we should limit the actions taken by the politicians in terms of such impact. So we need some very strict measures and framework for this.
The lag with the translation. I was just...
I speak too fast.
We apologize to the translators, but thank you very much for your hard work on this. Thank you, Sylwia, for that. Thank you very much. You've also touched on some very, very important points, but I am a bit wary of the time, and I do want to squeeze in one more question for you before we move on to the audience. Now, you've touched a bit in your opening intervention on this, but I want to go back to this idea of European Union member states going after national legislations because they are, let's say, too impatient to wait for Brussels to finish the process, or maybe they just want to go at it alone. We have France, Germany, Poland. They all started implementing or working to implement legislation that will basically do the same thing that the Digital Services Act will do. And you said already you're in favor of a more European approach to this, of course. But what do you think the final outcome will be when it comes to the actual marketplace and to the actual end user? Do you think that in the long run, maybe it will be more advantageous for them because your country, for example, let's say Poland, started doing this a bit earlier compared to Spain, for example, who's still waiting for the EU legislation. Yes, exactly.
At the very beginning, perhaps we should consider, as you just asked the question, why on the level of national parliaments such activities are implemented. Is it the matter of speed of implementation or perhaps other reasons? I do feel that in our country, the current authorities take different measures for internal purposes, let's call it this way. The most important politicians of the ruling parties suggest in their opinions that issues related to common rules are foreign to them because they would like to control everything. And unfortunately, they talk negatively about the EU, using such words as the occupant from Brussels, which is unacceptable for me, and I suppose it's unacceptable for the majority of people sitting here. I am fully convinced that once such regulations are implemented, it will be extremely important to present the primary values that these documents entail. We talk about the new social contract here, and we were discussing about it before the panel. We should show how these relations between the users, large corporations, and the government are executed, just to strike transparent rules and positive contract with the participation of each of us or serving each of us. What way is it going to follow? Hard to say. Over 2,000 amendments which have been submitted can affect the final shape of the document, but I keep my fingers crossed for it to give the sense of being the user of every service platform and not to be over-regulated, because it would be the wrong direction.
Thank you very much for that, and I think nobody really wants over-regulation when it comes to helping the end user and helping businesses in Europe flourish. Looking at the time, we only have 2.5 minutes, so I'm going to actually ask the public right now one quick question. Now, and I see a hand up. So let's take that question. Let's take that question from the audience, and then I'll ask the public.
Thank you. Michał Rakowski, Instytut Kościuszki. Ja mam pytanie polityczne.
I have a political question because DSA, DMA focus on the functions of the uniform digital market, and we know it results from the fact that the Commission has competence over competence policy when dealing with digital policies. They use the treaties provisions on the functions of the market, but these regulations apply to much broader challenges than only the competition policy. It's about the functioning of web services, controlling disinformation, controlling the influence, cybersecurity, privacy, and so on and so forth, just to mention a few. But the question which arises is as follows. Next year, the French presidency in the Council starts. We know that the leitmotif of Emmanuel Macron's presidency was to organize social consultations. So Macron would like to transplant this model onto the European level. The Commission started with a certain delay with the conference on the future of Europe. So we can see a certain trend and an opportunity to invite the European society to a debate on the future of Europe. It can be a striking question, but I would like to ask whether there is a need to start a conversation about the treaty's review or revision to grant more competences on the digital market and the technological revolution in such a way that it will serve the European society in the aspects exceeding market functioning and topics related to competition. Thank you.
For that question. And what we're going to do, because basically our time is out, but we're going to steal a couple of more minutes. And we're going to start with Arkadiusz. We're going to go around to all the speakers. If you want to touch upon the question from the audience, very well. Otherwise, you can have 30 seconds to say your message to the audience if you want to, and if you can, sum it down and that. But Arkadiusz, please.
Thank you very much for the question. If we are not capable of discussing it here, I will talk to you informally afterwards. Revision is the word which nowadays, when the authorities is spectacularly building or promoting the bad image of the EU, is a wrong word. But we don't know what the final shape of the solution is going to be. These are only the drafts presented by the European Commission, and I think they are following the right direction. If we, as the users of the internet and websites, could learn the rules based on which they direct some advertisements or take some measures, it will improve our subjectivity. If internet platforms are banned to store personal data of the users and to use it for profiling, I think it could be perceived as improvement of our subjectivity. However, there is also a proposal to include a provision that just let me give you an example. Users of Android telephones could use other apps, not only those dedicated for Android. So I think it improves our freedom and offers a broader choice. So that is why I think that's the right direction to follow. But I don't want to end my speech saying what it's going to look like finally, because today we are saying, yeah, it's the right direction, but potentially it may end up in providing different benefits. But after all, after the long discussion, after over 2,000 amendments, it may turn out we'll have something that causes trouble. I hope it's not going to be like that, but we should take a closer look at the discussion, participate in the discussion, show the solutions valuable for the users, and focus on it. But taking a more general view and broader focus, we should not focus on the revision of treaties. Okay, so just briefly, let me refer to the super interesting question which applies to the philosophy of changes in democracy under the influence of the digital revolution and the changes that technologies bring. I'm not sure whether the future year and the future French presidency is the moment. Perhaps it's too soon. But there are still a lot of considerations and deliberations on direct democracy and extending the competences of direct democracy on important decisions, not only local ones, but regional as well. So it is highly likely that the issues related to technologies, namely those that are supported by changeability due to the fact that we know what we need, what causes pain, or where the problem lies, are a perfect sensor for new solutions of fluent, direct democracy. I'm not sure whether 2022 is the probable date, but I think we should consider it. Okay, I don't want to answer this highly political question on the revision of the treaty. I would like to refer to what the MP said. I would like to warn you that some ideas that seem good for the users, if they are too far-fetched, against the goodwill or contrary to the expectations can be detrimental, such as the ban on data combining. Please imagine that the apps are not capable of exchanging the data, the calendar with the maps and with the email. It would limit the functionality of the whole ecosystem, Apple's ecosystem, and so on. So this is the only message from us. By protecting the users, which we absolutely agree with, we agree with transparency. The question is perhaps the tools that are available are no longer efficient enough, but we shouldn't pour the baby out with the bath and end up in a situation when the Europeans have half internet or half services as compared to the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. And that brings us to an end. I don't want to anger the organizers, and I don't want to keep you away from a coffee, a water, or maybe grabbing a bite to eat. Thank you very much for joining us online. Thank you very much for joining us physically in the room for this European Liberal Forum hub session on the future of digitalization, the Digital Services Act. Keep an eye out for it. It's going to change all of our lives when it's going to be approved at the European level. A very big thank you to our speakers. Fuck my life. I'm not gonna say it. Arkadiusz, Sylwia, Marcin, thank you very much for joining us today physically on the stage. It's glad to be physically again with people on the stage. A very big thank you to MEP Dita Charanzová for sending us her recorded message. My name is Andrei, Constantin. Wish you a very lovely afternoon and enjoy the rest of the Freedom Games. Thank you and goodbye.